Georgia, 4 months later, we said, no, we're overruling you. That ought to be habitual in this country. We ought to be doing that all the time. When the President of the United States says, in Wyoming, you're going to let men go into your girls' locker room and your girls' bathrooms and compete in women's sports because some senile old man walked up to a teleprompter and gave a speech about it. Are you kidding me? That's now the law in America? It's about like saying wearing a mask is a law. I go into these airports and the TSA agent, they didn't have a mask on. They say, you got a mask? I say, yeah. I smile as big as I could, and they say, well, you got to put it on. And I always said, well, why? Because I wanted them to say, because it's the law. I said, well, wait a minute, you're about my age. Didn't you grow up on Schoolhouse Rocks? Don't you remember the song? I'm a Bill from Capitol Hill. Why, that's where the elected representatives were. Not the dude at the other end, at the White House. He doesn't get to make law all by himself. There ain't no law. And then they say, well, it's a mandate. Or it's a mandate. I said, you're a law enforcement officer. You ought to know how law is made. Right? But we've let that happen. We've let the president do things they shouldn't do. We've let Congress do things they shouldn't do. We've let the courts do things they shouldn't do. And they have rewritten our Constitution without permission. If you've been through one of my Constitution classes, you know I say it all the time. We don't live under the Constitution right now. We live under the Courtstitution. We live under a court-interpreted Constitution. And the only way to overrule that properly and constitutionally, according to the Constitution, and the guys that gave us the Constitution, is to overrule them with an amendment. Why would we not do that? Why would we let them continue to run roughshod over us and destroy states' rights?
Hey, Rick, I got to interrupt you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I got going.
They don't follow the Constitution right now, though. I mean, so why would they follow it if we amend the Constitution?
Yeah, this is going to bother you a lot, but they do follow the Constitution. See, they're following the Constitution as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's not an amendment to the Constitution in the last 150 years that they're not following. So if you pass an amendment to the Constitution, it will be followed. Now, they're going to try to get away from it, and it might be 50 years from now, it might be 100 years from now. So far, last 150 years of amendments has held. Like, I think they're letting 18, 19, 20-year-olds vote right now, are they?
Women are allowed.
I think women are allowed to vote.
We can debate whether that's a good idea.
Hey. You just made half. Don't worry, I'll offend the other half of the room before it's over. We'll make sure everybody's equally offended before the night's over. No, the same thing with D.C. Are they letting D.C. have 3 electoral college votes or not? Right now, in other words, what I'm saying is, there's no doubt they're not following parts of the Constitution. There's no doubt they're ignoring some of the Bill of Rights. I mean, in my opinion, the justice system is a disaster right now. We have a 2-tier justice system. It's not biblical justice, it's social justice. Biblical justice is blind justice, equal justice, under the law. Everybody treated the same. Social justice says, what's the color of your skin? What church do you go to? Which party are you part of? Because I'm going to persecute you based on that. That's social justice. I just got back a couple weeks ago from testifying at a J6 hearing or trial in D.C. for the praying grandma. You've probably seen her. Rebecca Loppert, she's one of our Constitution coaches. And 72 years old, went and prayed for 10 minutes at the Capitol. And this DOJ is trying to put her in jail for a year. It's evil, it's wrong. The whole trial, Mark, you would have been so sick at how they manipulated the process. And the only thing, she's on trial for exercising her First Amendment right. I could not as a witness, and her attorneys could not even mention the First Amendment. So much for, making your case. I make my case. We put it before the jury, and they make a decision. No, totally manipulated. Anyway, all of that is happening because we're not willing to overrule the federal government. So yeah, they are ignoring parts of the Constitution, including much of the Bill of Rights, but they're not ignoring amendments that have happened in the last 100 years, 150 years. And that's why I adamantly believe, Mark, if we pass, let's take Mark Levin's amendment on that would correct the Commerce Clause. Let's overrule Wicker v. Filburn. Let's overrule a lot of these things that they've done to expand power through the Commerce Clause. If we did that, there's no question in my mind that would be followed, and the Supreme Court would uphold it. And then 10 years from now, some Supreme Court's going to hand down a decision to kind of tweak it, and then they're going to tweak it again, and 50 years from now, we're going to need to do it again. But they will follow amendments, because now we clarify what the Constitution says. There's no longer a way for them to misinterpret what the people have actually said in an amendment.
Yeah, and we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty of convention of states, but I want to throw out some fun stuff first just to kind of tease y'all. Rick and I were driving today, we're talking about some of the amendments that we think need to be done. And you guys hear the ones that are the common ones: term limits, Anybody think we need term limits in Washington DC? Yeah, almost everybody does, about 85% of the American public, the other 15% getting paid by the.
Mark, I don't understand why you'd want term limits. I think Nancy Pelosi's doing such a great job at it.
Mitch McConnell,
He's actually
awesome.
yeah, Mitch McConnell, I mean, he's all there, right?
And so look, term limits, but I'm saying not just term limits for the Congress people, but I think we need term limits for the staffers and the bureaucrats. I call that the Fauci amendment, by the way. We don't want another Anthony Fauci, right?
It's Pope Fauci. Pope Fauci.
And term limits, without term limits for those guys, will just empower the bureaucrats and the staffers. How about, anybody think the federal government's financially out of control? You guys are like, yeah, we're completely financially out of control. Zero incentive in Washington, D.C. to control the spending. There's a constituent for every single dollar. There's nobody in Washington, D.C. championing fiscal responsibility right now. They're never going to do it. They're going to kick the can down the road until all of us, and realistically, our kids and our grandkids, pay the price. They're not going to be able to buy houses, buy cars. The standard of living is going to be terrible. That's what they intend for all of us, and they don't care because they're getting theirs right now. So if we don't restrain them fiscally, they're never going to restrain themselves. Human beings, by the way, we're just incentive machines. If you give us incentives, we'll always move towards those incentives, and there's no incentive to cut spending or to balance the budget. So we need tax caps, we need spending caps, we need a balanced budget amendment. Here's one. We need generally accepted accounting principles imposed on the federal government. You know, when you pay your taxes, you account for your finances exactly the same as every business does. You got money in, you got money out, you got to track all of this stuff, you got net income, you're going to pay taxes on your net income. That's the way it works, or you go to jail. The federal government doesn't work that way, by the way. They don't use...
Unless you're Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't use generally accepted accounting principles. I was at a meeting, this goes back maybe 12 years, 13 years ago. I was at the Office of Management and Budget, fancy name for the guys that decide how all the money flows in and out. And I knew that they didn't use generally accepted accounting principles. The abbreviation is GAAP. That's what they call it. Yeah. And so I said to these guys sitting around this table, a bunch of high-level executives, bureaucrats, and I said, so I know you all don't use generally accepted accounting principles. What principles do you use? And I'm not kidding you. They said, well, we don't have any principles. Like, no, I know that. I'm talking about accounting principles. And they literally don't. I call it Skittles and unicorns accounting. It's like they just say, well, that's going to be off book. Can you imagine if you could just say to the federal government, I know I brought in, $50,000 there. I'm just not going to account for that part of the money. I mean, we go to jail, and so we got to impose this stuff on those guys.
Can I throw one in, Mark?
Yeah, please.
Most of y'all probably know this, but right now, we don't have an enumeration, which is the word used in the Constitution. We have a census, which now does all these things that the Constitution never called for, and worse yet, it's not counting citizens in our country, it's counting all the illegals, and it's skewing the makeup of Congress by as many as 25 seats, because we're allowing these sanctuary cities to count the folks that they invited in that are not citizens, and therefore they end up with more representation in Congress. That is insane. And I don't think we pulled it yet. I think 80-90% of Americans that are citizens would say that's wrong. The whole idea of representation in Congress is supposed to be representation of the citizens of our country. So I would love to see just a simple amendment that says that the enumeration is of citizens in the country. Now, you can count other numbers, and the reason they do it is to divvy up all the dollars that they're taking unconstitutionally anyway and spending on unconstitutional programs. So you could still count everybody in the country, but in terms of the enumeration and how you're going to divide up congressional seats, that should absolutely be based on the number of citizens.
Anybody be in favor of that amendment? Yeah, that'd be a good one, right? Here's another one. We hear all the time now, the left has been talking about packing the Supreme Court, right? So you got 9, they don't like it because that court sort of leans conservative, sometimes. John Roberts.
If you can cobble together 5 votes, which we can't sometimes. Yeah.
So they'd like to see, that maybe they'll make it 15 or whatever, and they'll just dominate the court. We could have an amendment, it'd be a simple amendment, it's supported by probably 85-90% of Americans, limit the Supreme Court to 9. Just be done with it. Because that's a crazy nuclear option, because the Democrats will make it 15, the Republicans will make it 25, and then we're going to have 1,000 people on the Supreme Court. So we could lock that down and fix that. Here's another one. How about the border? Look, we're from Texas. We know what's going on the border. Whatever you see in the news, and I mean whatever you see in the news, it's way worse. It's not even close. They don't show you 25% of what's going on down in the border.
Evil worse.
We've been down there. I've seen things that I just literally can't even describe. I've seen videos that I can't get out of my head. We did a rally to secure the border at the Texas Capitol. I saw so many photos of just carnage on the border. I would just say, if you saw any of the video from Israel and from the terrorist attack in Israel, that kind of stuff is going on our border right now. And so I think Texas should be able to enforce the border. Anybody think Texas ought to be able to enforce the border? Yeah, well, the Biden administration doesn't think so, and the courts don't seem to think so. We could pass a constitutional amendment giving the states concurrent authority to enforce border and immigration law. Anybody like that idea? Yeah, I mean, we need to do this stuff. So this is stuff that there's literally no other way to get done. And we all agree it needs to get done. Are they ever going to impose term limits on themselves?
Never.
Are they ever going to limit their own spending? Or their own? Have you ever heard of a story in all of human history, any story, any historical story, where a tyrant said, you know what?
I'm so sorry about that. Let me give that power back.
Not too much
Yeah,
power. I think I need to give it back to them. No, that's never happened, literally, in all of human history. And so we're in this room, all these people.
And remember that they took that power unconstitutionally. So the 17 million things they're doing beyond the 17 things they're supposed to do in the Constitution, they took that power without us ever having a constitutional amendment to do it.
So they're never going to give it back. All of us want that power. Anybody in this room not want that power back? Raise your hand if you don't want that power back. That's good, because I was going to make you leave. Yeah, look, we all want that power back. And so my question is, for me personally, how do we get that power back?
Hey, and Mark, I'll also say that it's not even just those who call themselves conservatives or freedom lovers or whatever. One interesting thing that's happening right now, because this court can be cobbled together and get 5 good votes, and we've had a lot of good decisions over the last couple of years, you've got some more liberal-leaning, leftist maybe even leaning states, and folks in those states saying, we don't want Neil Gorsuch telling us what to do. We don't want Clarence Thomas telling us what to do. And we're like, hey, welcome to the party. We've been saying that for 50 years, that the Supreme Court should not tell you what to do. So I think we're going to see, I think it's going to surprise us as that, if we get more of that, certainly if Trump wins and all those things, I think you're going to see other people in the country say, not on an issue or anything like that, but just in terms of structure and in terms of who decides these things, they're going to even want the power back. It's part of that selfish give and take the Founding Fathers knew our system would help with if you had that tension and that tug of war and those checks and balances. So I think we're going to have some strange bedfellows, to be honest with you, when it comes to getting the power back, because other states, not just Wyoming and Texas and more conservative states, but even more moderate and even some liberal states, they're going to want the power for themselves, and that's great. Let them live like they want to live, and let us live like we want to live.
Yeah, and so look, we all agree they're never going to give us that stuff back. And yet I hear people all the time, we travel, and I know you hear this, you know what? All we got to do is elect good people who believe in the Constitution. We just got to elect good people and send them to Washington, D.C. You got an answer for that one?
Yeah, those good people get swallowed up by the swamp. I've watched it over and over and over and over again. My wife tried to convince me of this years ago, Mark, before I was for term. When I was a legislator, I was against term limits. Imagine that. No, but I literally going in, I didn't think term limits was necessary. I bought the thing about, we have term limits at the ballot box and all that stuff. And we weren't there 4 years. And my wife's looking around at all these other legislators that have been there 30, 40 years. She's like, man, we need term limits. And so she kept trying to talk me into it. And then I was actually out of the legislature for about 5 years. And I was watching people that had been there for 15, 20 years and how they just became so jaded. And they became almost like furniture. Like they didn't want to do anything. They weren't good legislators anymore. And they were literally just there for the shrimp and caviar. And it really changed my whole attitude about it. I think the swamp swallows you up. So I don't have, and even if we did elect, Mike Johnson, I've known him for 15 years. He's a biblically solid guy.
Absolutely.
He's was a constitutionally solid guy. He's done things the last few months that has made me say, and I gave him a lot of rope. I was like, hey, y'all, I'm not in the room, so I don't know what's going on in the room. You got to trust the guy in the room at this point. He's done some things the last few months. I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. But the system is broken. So I don't, and I'm telling you, he's a good man. You've got a lot of good people you can throw into the system, but the system is broken. And it's gobbling them up, and it's not even a majority in Congress. And even a good president like Donald Trump is not going to be enough. It will not be enough to turn this thing around. It's got to be done constitutionally through amendments and from the states, not through the feds.
So one of the reasons we know this is because the framers of the Constitution told us it's literally. And so if you go back to September of 1787, they're in convention. You all know that story, right? That steamy hall in Philadelphia, the windows are all boarded up, they're in convention. For me, the most important date in all of American history is September 15th. And probably none of you recognize that date and recognize why. You probably shouldn't, but I have to. That's my wife's birthday, and so if I forget that, that's it. I don't get to go home if I forget that, right? But September 15th is also what we call Article 5 Day. That's the day that Colonel George Mason stands up and he addresses the men assembled there in the hall. It's 2 days before the end of convention. Imagine, like they're pretty much done and they're ready to go home. And he stands up. He spoke a lot at convention. I think he spoke the third most of anybody at convention. They're probably tired of hearing from him. But he stands up and he says, we have a problem with the document we drafted. And I'm paraphrasing. We have Madison's notes, so we don't have exact language. But he said, we've got a problem. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we didn't give it to the people acting through the states. And he asked a question, are we so naive, are we so stupid that we actually believe that a federal government which becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Right? And I imagine, in my mind, they all laughed. I think they slapped their foreheads, right, if they did that back then. Because it's so obvious that a tyrant never gives away his own power. And they needed to create a mechanism for that to happen. And we kind of know what happened because Madison's notes say something very simple at that spot. They say NIN-COM, 2 Latin abbreviations for no comment. There's no debate. I mean, these are guys who debated how to debate. They debated literally everything. On that one, there's no debate. And it's the only thing I'm aware of in the Constitution, Rick, no debate and unanimously adopted. Right. And so it gets in there, it says, and they're saying to us, in the future, you guys, things are going to get out of control. Washington, D.C. is going to quit responding. They didn't even have Washington back then, Washington, D.C. But the Capitol is going to quit responding to you guys. You're going to have to exercise your control over the federal beast that we're creating. And they knew they were creating a beast. They came from a central government that was bad and that was corrupt and that was tyrannical. There's an interesting side about these guys who were forming up that government, who were fomenting the revolution and forming the government. If you read the great pamphleteers of the age, you know, they had the internet, believe it or not, back then. When they wanted to get their ideas out, they would speak publicly or they would create these pamphlets and they would publish literally 10,000 of them. And that was a huge amount. They would get distributed and these ideas would go out and you read them. There's a phrase that you find in the pamphleteers of the era that when I first read it, I was astounded. Now, these are men who were fomenting a revolution. And you'll find this language in a bunch of these pamphleteers. They say, the British government is the finest form of government ever instituted among mankind for the preservation of liberty.
And why are we revolting?
Right? Isn't that's just the weirdest thing, right? And I read that, like, this doesn't make any sense. That's a weird line to find in those pamphlets. The next line, something like this in most of the pamphlets was, however, at this time in history, we find ourselves in a position where all the branches of government seem to be conspiring against the common man.
This sounds so
Does that sound familiar?
So what is?
Yeah. So it's like we're in the same position. We love our form of government. I love our Constitution. I think we do have the finest form of government ever for the preservation of liberty among mankind. But the branches of government are conspiring against the common people. That's where we're at. And so what did they do? They said, we got to restrain that federal government. They created a constitution, and they gave us the power to fix the situation if it ever happened again. You know, I have a pretty vivid imagination, and I like to imagine myself sitting with the framers. Anybody ever do that? Like, it's so incredible, what these guys were going through, sitting in these ale houses, arguing, debating big ideas. It just seems so fascinating. And I think about, like, what would happen if I could talk to Ben Franklin today? And he's one of my favorites. He's probably the last guy in human history to know pretty much everything, right? That guy knew every subject. He traveled all over the world. That was really rare. At the time of the Constitutional Convention, he's the oldest guy in convention.
81.
81 years old. So just the elder statesman. And I imagine myself sitting down in a Philadelphia ale house with Dr. Franklin and complaining about what's going on. You know, they tell us what kind of buggies we can drive. They tell us what we can feed our horses. They tell us what kind of fuel we can use. Good Lord, Dr. Franklin, they'd even tell you how deep the hole can be underneath your outhouse. And I imagine him saying, well, that's just crazy. I mean, what are you doing to restrain them? Oh, well, you know, we've sent as many good people there to the Capitol as we can. And be like, didn't you learn anything? I mean, we designed a government for bad people. It wasn't designed, we know men are no angels, or no government would be necessary among men. It's like, well, how about Article 5? We gave you guys Article 5 because we knew this was going to happen. You guys called the convention to restrain the federal government, right? Well, yeah, I mean, people are scared. People are scared? We fought a revolution, son. We went out on Lexington Green, farmers and doctors and lawyers picked up our muskets, and we were willing to fight the greatest fighting army ever assembled in human history. You guys are scared to having a meeting? And I imagine him pounding down his glass of ale and saying, you know what, son, I can't be bothered with you anymore. Come back and talk to me after you call a convention and you work to restrain your federal government, and then you tell me what happened. And that's where we sit in American history. We sit at a crossroads. Everybody in this room said the federal government's out of control. All of y'all said that. Everybody said you don't believe the federal government's ever going to restrain itself. All of you said that. All of you said that we could elect good people and they're still not going to fix the federal government. So the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to sit on our backsides and just watch this whole thing go down the tubes that so many people died for, literally, or are we going to stand up and fight for it? And I can tell you, for me, for my kids, for my family, for Convention of States, we're going to fight for it.
Yeah.
And I believe we're going to take back this country.
I want to add two people to your conversation at the ale house, or the tavern, as I would like to call it. And one of those would be Sam Adams, because he would respond to you and say, so you haven't done what you needed to do? Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you, and may we never remember that you were our countrymen. Those are his words to those who aren't willing to use the tools that you've been given.
And I mean, he literally said people were complaining about what they were doing, and they're getting riled up, and they're ready to have this fight. And he said, we don't need your counsels. We don't need your arms. Go away. Like, literally, just go away and leave us alone.
Get out of the way, really. Exactly. Yeah.
We'll fight for the country. We'll save the country for everybody. We don't even want to hear from you. And I got to be honest with y'all. I'm going to be a little bit direct with you. For the people who tell us we shouldn't call a Convention of States, that's pretty much how I feel right now. Go away. Just leave us alone. We'll save the country for all of y'all. And because you guys can keep voting in elections, and God bless you, we should all do that. Super important to elect the best people we can. But if that's all you're going to do, then you're taking us down the road to perdition, and I'm not on that road.
I'm going to use the second guy against you, Mark. Jefferson, he wasn't there, right? So right. He wasn't at the
he was in France.
Convention, right? So he maybe has a little bit different attitude, but he said in the Declaration of Independence, after he talks about life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, of course he tells us how to keep it, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So that's how you keep life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You have to be willing to stand up and give or refuse your consent. But then he said something. He said that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, what ends? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, truth, the ability to give or refuse our consent, all of those things that he just got through talking about, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, unless it's the federal government, and the states would have to do it, and then we wouldn't want you to do that. That's what he said.
Yeah, he said it'd be too scary.
Of course he didn't say that. He said when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, we're not for abolishing our government. We're for altering our government constitutionally back to the way that it was designed to work. Now, I do want to abolish quite a few departments of our government, right? There's a lot of federal agencies that shouldn't exist in the first place and are completely unconstitutional. But, I think Jefferson would have absolutely agreed with the idea that when that government gets out of control, it is up to us to constrain it. It will never constrain itself. And if we don't constrain it, we're going to get to the point where we no longer have the ability to constrain it. There's a window here that we have. Well, part of what I love about, you said this earlier, and Ronald Reagan said it this way. He said, I'm glad I don't live in pale and timid times. I'm glad to live at a time where what I'm doing is making a difference. So I love what you said a while ago. I feel exactly the same way. We have been placed in this moment in history where there's a window of opportunity where people are actually, look at this, showing up on a Monday night to talk about the Constitution and saving our country. And like Mark said, we travel around the country, groups like this almost every night. And it is so encouraging to see so many people get involved. Because I promise you, 10 years ago, it was a lot harder to get this many people into a room. 10 years ago, trying to get people to study the Constitution or think about the Constitution, we went from 200 Constitution coaches 4 years ago to 28,000 Constitution coaches right now. People are ready to get involved. They're saying, I know the country's falling apart. America is the greatest nation in the history of the world, but she is crumbling all around us right now on our watch, and frankly, right on time. We're 2 years and 50-something days from our 250th birthday. And that's when civilizations fall apart. But the founders gave us the tool to interrupt the cycle. You know the cycle, you've seen the memes, tough times make for tough men make for good times make for soft men, and soft men lead to tough times. We've had it so good in America that we've gotten soft. And so we have to be the ones. We're just barely entering tough times. It can get a whole lot worse than this. And we, the people, have the ability to interrupt that cycle, get back to the things that actually produce a good society, And what a wonderful time to be alive. And what a wonderful moment in American history where people are willing to listen to reason and willing to come together and talk and say, what can I do? And they are, man. They're joining, they're taking Constitution classes. They're saying, okay, I know we're crumbling. What can I do about it? And you were just about to talk about the solution itself. And it's not a silver bullet. I do want to say that none of us are saying, oh, if we do COS, it's done. We fixed everything. Now we can go home and we don't have to think about it anymore. It's literally just one of the tools in the toolbox. It just happens to be the best tool that the Founding Fathers gave us for reining in the federal government. We're all for elections. We both spend a ton of our time being involved in elections, electing good people. I served in the legislature in Texas. I mean, we're all about that. That's necessary to make the process. We're all about education. I put a million people through Constitution classes. We take these 16 to 25-year-olds and train them, all the different things, military veterans, all that. We do the education part. But you also have to actually use the means at your fingertips to actually work the process, to actually govern. And that means we, the people, governing by balancing the table once again, balancing the powers, and actually pushing back against the federal government, the proper constitution.
Now, I have a question for you, Rick. So I hear from people all the time, this is a really common objection, that they're afraid of going to convention. And at a convention, what goes on at a convention is delegations come in from all the states made up of commissioners, and their job in that convention is to have a debate and to make suggestions. If they can get 26 states to agree, then their job at the end of a convention, their whole total power, some power, is to make some suggestions to the states, right? This is how the process works. And so my question to you is, I mean, you've held a lot of meetings over the years. You have meetings in your organization all the time. Have you ever been afraid of people making suggestions?
Well, yeah, actually, no, I'm gonna say I understand why they feel that way. I really do. And honestly, that was me. I was one of those folks 15 years ago. I felt the exact same way because I did not understand that it was just a suggestion. And I had this guy on my radio program, and I was like, dude, if we do this, what if they do that? And what if these people show up? Or, I don't even like my colleagues from the legislature. What are you talking about? I'm going to send them to do it. And I was going through all the things, right, that we often hear. And he goes, Rick, I said, wait a second. Have you read Article 5? Do you understand what the steps are for this thing to take? Well, yeah, of course I do. He's like, okay, well, what happens at the end of the convention? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, it's a suggestion at the end of the convention that gets approved by the convention, and they send that suggestion back to all 50 states. He said, Rick, you're pretty good with that. He said, if they do something, because again, God and guns guy, right? So I'm like, Second Amendment. And so I said, yeah, so what if they suggest that we get rid of the Second Amendment? He said, Rick, how many states have to ratify an amendment? I said, what are we going to do? 38. He said, how many states you need to say no in order to prevent that amendment from passing? And I said, 12. And he goes, no, you need 13. But my math wasn't there. Anyway, he said, so 13 states. And he said, Rick, you don't even need both legislatures, but both houses in each of those 13 states. You need one chamber. So if the House in Wyoming says no, it doesn't matter if the Senate says yes, Wyoming's a no. And when he said that, it was like the light bulb came on, and I realized, holy cow, I can throw a rock from my house in Dripping Springs, Texas to 13 states that would tell that convention to take a hike if they sent back an amendment that in any way infringed on the Second Amendment. In fact, we would probably get an amendment in that prevented the feds from stepping on the Second Amendment like they're doing right now without a convention. Can I just say that? All the things you might be afraid are going to happen, they're happening. They're happening right now. And we have a tool to overturn. So yes, I felt that way. I found actually this is the way to stop those very things that I was afraid of.
I hear the Second Amendment thing all the time, and it really blows me away. Like, we're going to put the Second Amendment at risk. My son's a Marine. My mom retired as a law enforcement officer. You might notice I'm wearing a little bit of jewelry tonight. We like the Second Amendment.
Charlton Heston would come back from the dead and kill me.
Well, and so I'm not great at math. Like, you did some pretty good math there, right? And I'm a lawyer, so I have an excuse for not being great at math. Plus, I went to school in Los Angeles, California. So, man, Lord knows I learned to do math.
Fuzzy math, yeah, fuzzy math.
Whatever that is. But I can do this math. Today, there are 29 states in the United States of America that allow constitutional carry, means permanent list carry, right? Florida just became...
Wait, you mean I don't have to ask?
Can you believe that? To exercise your Second Amendment, right? Yeah.
Almost sounds like you're free.
In 29 states, you're free, at least that free. Yeah. In 24 states, by the way, you can carry your handgun in the Capitol, which I really love. I've done that in most states. By the way, y'all need to chase Texas on this one. We got a fast pass lane in our Texas legislature, if you did get a permit because you wanted reciprocity, you go to the front of the line, you walk up, sir, I have a handgun, they're like, welcome to the Capitol. You get to skip the line, it's just the best thing, I love that about Texas. And so there's 24 states you can bring your handgun in. There's actually, believe it or not, 14 states where you can take an AR, put one in the chamber, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the legislature. I'm not recommending that, to be clear, but you can do that. And we can't find 13 states that would say no to the repeal of the Second Amendment. That's just insane. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. And by the way...
Well, wait, you're math. So if 29 legislatures have said you don't even need a permit to get the Constitution's your permit, right? And those 29 are going to send people to this convention where they're going to suggest any delegates from those states that would suggest an amendment that would infringe upon the Second Amendment probably ought not go home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not going to do well.
It's not even going to pass at the convention is what I'm saying. Yeah.
And by the way, it's important to remember how things work in a legislature. Because one of the things you said is Wyoming could say no, right? But the way that a legislature says no, and I know we got some folks who are in elected office in the room tonight or run for office, so no offense intended, but what legislatures are the very best at doing is nothing. Like, that's a legislature's like, if I don't have to do anything, then nobody will be mad at me. This is how, the ones that aren't brave, which is most of them, this is how they work. Like, do I gotta take a position? And so the way that you don't ratify an amendment,
do nothing.
It never makes it into committee, there's never a vote. And so the legislatures love this. It's like, you mean I don't have to do anything on this controversial issue? That's awesome. And so there is literally 0% chance that they're going to repeal the Second Amendment. Now, I've made an offer. I'll make it to y'all here tonight. I've made this offer. There's no exaggeration to millions of people. I give out my personal email address, mmeckler@cosaction.com. I've done this on Hannity's show, on Levin, on Shapiro, all these huge shows. And I give them my email address, and I said, if you're like us, if you're a liberty-loving person, and you're worried about this, then what I want you to do is just quickly email me, tell me which amendment you're afraid of. Like, what is it that could happen in convention you'd be afraid of? And then give me the list of the 38 states that will ratify. And then I'll reach out to you, we'll have a conversation directly. So I've been doing that for almost 11 years now. Sum total of emails that I've gotten in 11 years is 0. I've tried this exercise myself. You can't do it. You cannot come up with 38 states that would ratify something that anybody in this room wouldn't like. And if you try to do it, you'll run up against the wall of numbers. This is just called reality. You can be afraid or you can live in reality. And so we got to get past fear. And the last thing I want to say about fear, about being afraid, is we are not a country built on cowardice. This is the bravest, most courageous country in the history of the earth. And we did things that no other country has ever done. We went out as a nation in World War II, and we faced down fascism and totalitarianism in a multi-front war all over the world that we had no business winning. Because we are an extraordinary people here in the United States of America. And we're not afraid. We're brave people. We're courageous people. We conquered this entire continent. We came across this continent. The people came to this state. Can you imagine what that was like? Rick and I were driving over here. It's rainy, it's cold. And I was saying, how rainy and cold as we run to and from the car. People were sitting out there on their horses, trying to get dry. They're in drenching rain for days on end. We are a hardy people. And the idea that anybody would say to me, or to any of us, that we should be too scared to try and save our government is offensive to me. It's offensive to the framers of the United States Constitution. Those men and women, those families that died, the people that went out onto Lexington Green and took the first bullets of that war, the men who died on the beaches at Normandy, some just boys who died on the beaches at Normandy, and we're just saying, you went out, you were willing to face the cliffs, the machine gunners, you were willing to put everything on the line for freedom, but us, we're too scared to hold a meeting. And I find that offensive. I just can't believe that that's what we're made up of as a people nowadays. I know I see all the soy boys on the news and soy boys at these colleges. That's not America. That's not Wyoming. The Wyoming legislature is too afraid to do this. You've got to be kidding me. And so for me, if I sound riled up, it's because I'm riled up. Because I'm pissed off. They're trying to take our country away from us, and we have the means to restore it, and people out there who should know better are refusing to do it, and they're fighting against it. It's absolutely unbelievable. I'm going to close with this, Rick, and then go to you. Read these 2 posters. Yeah. This is really important. If you read who is against Convention of States, Hillary Clinton, Howard Dean, George Soros, La Raza, MoveOn.org, Planned Parenthood, do I need to go any deeper? Every time I go into a legislature, the Sierra Club testifies against us. The League of Women Voters testifies against us. Earth Justice, I don't even know what these things are. People for the American Way. It's every leftist, America-hating, baby-killing, communist organization in the United States of America testifies against us in the legislature. And you know what they say? The same thing against us that the few people on the right who are against us say. And when I say the same thing, I mean the exact words. You can go to Common Cause's website, the largest policy organization on the left right now, and you can read that's like 50-page section, couple $100,000 spent, slandering us, attacking us, saying all the things that we're trying to do. And the people who testify against us from the right, same exact language. First time I testified in Montana, I got emails from the left saying, hey, by the way, the John Birch Society, they're our friends, and be nice to them, and here's the John Birch Society talking points to use. And I want to be really clear. There are none of our friends on the right who I agree with on every other issue might be posed on this issue. They're not working with the left. By the way, they accuse us of working with the left. I don't think anybody in the John Birch Society is working with the left, is in league with the left, is paid by the left, none of that stuff. But they are perfectly aligned with the left on this issue. The left is using this as a wedge to divide us, to keep conservatives from using the Constitution to save the Constitution. And in some places, they've been pretty effective. Look at that list. These are the people who support. Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, all the way down. Look, there are people on there that you don't like either. I guarantee you, like Jeb Bush maybe, right? There's people on there you don't like. Eric Metaxas is with us. Morton Blackwell's with us. James Dobson, an icon in the conservative Christian movement. Mark Meadows, former chief of staff for Trump. It's like every national figure on the right that's spoken on this issue is in support of what we're doing. And so to me, I'm a simple guy, Rick. If you came to me one morning and said, Mark, I need to talk to you about this issue, but I'm not going to tell you what the issue is. What I am going to tell you is all these people are opposed on this issue, and all these people are in favor. I'm like, you, brother, you don't need to tell me what the issue is. I'm on that side. I never woke up on the left side of the bed in my whole life. And if I did, if somebody told me, man, you're with all those people, I'd look in the mirror and be like, what's going on with you? What are you thinking? What's going on in that head that you somehow found yourself aligned with all of these people? I think I got to rethink my position. And so I want to encourage you, if you're hesitant about this, to start there and just look at which side are you on, and then hopefully, if you find yourself on this side, then you ask yourself, well, why? Why am I on that side? It doesn't make sense. I've never been on that side on any other issue.
Yeah, and I think just be willing to study and ask questions and air your concerns. And we want to hear we want to answer those questions. It took me several years, honestly, of studying and really getting there. And not just me. I mean, and I can say this, virtually every conservative legal scholar is with us now. And most of them were worried about it. Mark Levin started writing the book being against it. Yeah. And then as he studied it, he's like, what am I doing? This is the solution that we need to be able to use. David Barton, I mean, all of these people like that are steeped in constitutional knowledge, that know the history, that really studied hard, they're all with us now. And that's vital to recognize. Just, a couple quick thoughts on what you were saying about the whole being afraid. I think safetyism is killing us in America. We bought this idea. It's the reason we bowed to the whole COVID, insanity, crackdowns, and all that nonsense, because we're playing it safe. Everybody's playing it safe. I drove by a lumber yard where it said, in Texas, of all places, and I grew up working in a lumber yard. I grew up by this lumber yard, and on the marquee sign it said, safety is our highest value. I had to pull over and throw up, first of all. But the idea that safety would be your highest value, but part of the reason it made me so upset is because it was right after a particular incident in Texas, and the immediate thing I thought was, if safety's your highest value, you will cower in the hallway with your ballistic shield and your bulletproof vest with 100 other officers while a maniac is murdering children on the other side of the door. Uvalde, Texas, exactly. It just happened. And I thought, that's what happened. That commander was convinced that he had to play it safe, play it safe, play it safe. So children died as a result of that. If safety is your highest value, you'll cower in your home from a 99.9% survivable virus. You'll ask the government, beg them to save you. We attribute this to Ben Franklin. We don't really know who wrote it. It was a 1755 letter from the colonial legislature. But we love that phrase. Everybody knows it, right? If you'll give up your safety, if you'll give up your liberty for safety, then you deserve neither liberty or safety. There's nothing about the American dream, American exceptionalism, our history, our DNA that is about playing it safe. None of our greatness came from playing it safe. Ronald Reagan, when the shuttle exploded in '86, I was a freshman in high school, and I remember him looking at the television and saying to the school children of America, you might be wondering why we would take the risk. Why would we take a chance? Why would we not play it safe? He said, because the future does not belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. We will not be the land of the free if we are not the home of the brave. And I think it's essential for us to recognize that we have to be willing to use the tools in front of us. There is no perfect solution to anything, but we are not going to shy away from a fight. We're not going to cower away from using a particular tool. We're not going to not go vote this year because somebody might try to manipulate the system or the whatever excuse. No, we're going to charge in. That's the DNA of Americans. You mentioned World War II. Think about those guys running into burning buildings on 9/11. Think about all, we're Texans, the immortal 32 from Gonzales, Texas, that fought their way into the Alamo knowing they were going to die, but willing to do so for freedom. I just think we've got to channel that and stop doing this, play it safe, because something bad might happen, and so let's just stay home all the time. That's not freedom. That's not living. Man, let's use the tools that we've got. I think we're on the right side of this thing, the right team. I'm the same way as Mark, and believe me, all those folks, why do they not want this to happen? Because they get to get their policies passed through the courts right now. They get what they want through the regulatory agencies right now. The reason we're all for this is because we want to restore actual legislative power in the states, the people's representatives. We want to bring the power back to the states. We want to shrink the size of government. So they know this is their worst nightmare. This stops the slouch towards absolute socialism. This is the way that you prevent them from turning America into a socialist hell, or as Dinesh D'Souza said, the socialist states of America. So and here's the thing. We said it, you're not alone. We know this is going to be a tough fight, but my goodness, there are millions of people that have signed up to say, I'm in, man, let's go. Let's save this country. And we want Wyoming to be leading the way. The West can save our country. If we can get everybody to just do their job under the Constitution, that's all we're asking.
Deanna, do you collect questions already?
There's some.
Okay, so if you guys want to ask questions, we've got cards, and you can write a question down. I want to be really clear on something. So we'll have people who want to ask hard questions, and we're up for that. We're not going to filter questions. As long as you guys are willing to stay here, we're willing to answer questions. I try to go through every single question that there is. We do it this way because we just found it's difficult when you have people with microphones. People tend to stand out.
Your speech is not ask questions.
Exactly. So if you write your question down, we're happy to answer all the questions that you guys have. We'll stick around as long as you guys will have us, or as long as they'll allow us to stick around here. Do you have questions already? Do you want to read them, or do you want me to read them? I'll hand them up here. Well, we can read them.
You can read. I can't read, man.
We do have a hard break at, or hard end at 8:45. The library likes to leave at 9, so.
That's like 5 minutes.
No.
Oh, I'm an hour ahead. Okay, we got an hour, roughly. So feel free, if you haven't written your question down and you want to write a question, feel free to go ahead and do it right now. We got plenty of time. All right, so this says, do you trust Albert Summers, who stopped a bill to prevent boys and girls sports, to represent Wyoming at a convention of states? Well, I don't know Albert Summers, so I can't say specifically on a personal level, but what I can tell you is this. I don't care who goes to a convention of states. Look, when the framers framed up this system of governance, it was specifically intended for men like that, literally, right? And they said, if men were angels, then no government would be necessary among men. One of the things that the framers were geniuses about is structure. They understood that structure drives behavior, structure drives outcomes, so they created a convention process that is not at risk because we send bad people to convention. Look, y'all are gonna send some bad people to convention. Every state is, in my opinion. I originally come from California. It's gonna be nothing but bad people from California, right? I predict they're gonna send a psychedelic painted bus with a bunch of hookah pipes in it. Lord knows what those guys are gonna do at convention. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. Every state gets one vote. No matter what, they can send 100 people, 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. They're all gonna get one vote. Wyoming has as much power in convention as California has. Makes no difference. And remember, you still gotta get 26 days to get something out of convention. And when you do, it's a suggestion. You still gotta get 38 states to ratify. So when people say, do I trust a guy like that? I don't know, I don't know him. I'll just say no, because he's a politician, right? So I just generalize.
Bob McEwen says, you only trust a politician as far as you can throw them over your shoulder left-handed.
There you go. And I got a bad shoulder, so not very far. So it doesn't matter to me whether we trust the individuals. Our whole system of governance was set up to be filled by people that we don't necessarily trust.
I just want to, because that's such an important point to even in our mindset of what we envision a good government to be versus a bad government. The self-interest of the individual, you are not going to get rid of. That is the nature of man. That's the depravity of man. Our founding fathers understood the depravity of man. That's why they wanted separation of powers. They quoted Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is evil, no man can know it. They said that it wasn't just Montesquieu's spirit of the laws. It was, they're saying this is how man is. Therefore, you must have this tension. You must have all of these checks and balances and this separation of powers. And right now, the power is not separated. It's mostly in Washington, D.C. And even a person you totally disagree with on every issue, as a state legislator, their self-interest is going to say, I want the power back in my state. Well, good. I want the power back in their state, too. That's why we're not going to pass anything on life or on any of these social issues at a convention. It's going to be all about structure, getting the power back to the states, and that's where we can then fight about those particular issues. This is somewhat along those lines. Well, it just says, why is Mark's beard so much better than Rick?
That's just a matter of opinion, Rick.
It's kind of along the same lines. With Liz Cheney being booted out of office by the good people of Wyoming, here, don't we already have a mechanism to remove bad legislators? Do we really want to give Harriet Hageman and Jim Jordan a premature boot? I'm not sure how a convention gives them a premature boot.
Maybe term limits.
Yeah, well, I guess okay, so maybe that person's actually against term limits. Listen, I have fun debating this with David Barton anyway. David is not for term limits either. I'm very firmly for term limits, and he's actually kind of on the fence about it. He's like, if that gets passed into the Constitution, I can support that. I always bring up John Adams with him, because John Adams said, without term limits, man becomes a ravenous beast of prey. And I think that's true. Anyway, so yeah, I think if this person's just simply not for term limits, we just disagree on that particular structure issue, which it is just a structure issue. I tend to think, a lot of people argue against term limits, saying institutional knowledge, you need that person that's been there forever. I'm kind of wanting to get rid of the institutional knowledge. I'm wanting fresh blood. I want new blood to come in, new ideas, that sort of thing. And the kind of term limits I'd be for, I'd be happy with 12 years. It can be an extended period of time, and then they have time to mentor somebody else and pass the torch. But I don't know of a single district in America where there's not someone else in that district of 800,000 constituents that can serve that community as well or better, sending them to Washington, D.C. So I don't know if you want to jump on that one.
No, I'm good. I got a ringer for you. This one goes directly to you. It says, for Rick, Tom Gross is teaching a biblical citizenship class this fall in Wreck, Wyoming. If there's enough interest, are you willing to hold one in Gillette?
Oh, heck yeah, let's hold one in every community across Wyoming.
We got enough interest
yes,
to do it.
Hey, and I'll tell you guys, one of the cool things you'll like about it, if you haven't been through one of our Patriot Academy Constitution classes, they're not boring, okay? This isn't your typical history and government class. I don't know about you, when I was in high school and college, the optimum learning position when it came to history or government was, right? It's all memorized dates and names. We don't do that, okay? Our classes are fun, they're entertaining. They're the only Constitution classes known to mankind in which you will not sleep. So anyway, I know you'll enjoy them. Kirk Cameron teaches on the Monument to the Forefathers. Of course, David Barton on the Founding Fathers, and Tim Barton does this great response to the 1619 project. He just destroys it, shows what a bunch of bunk it was. In fact, Tim will be with us Wednesday night in South Dakota. And then a lot of other people are in there teaching. It's fun, it's entertaining. I actually teach the Constitution part of it in Independence Hall. So we take you into the room where it all happened. And it's very much what can the citizen do about this? So it's literally a citizen's guide to the Constitution. What can we do to restore these principles in our Constitution? So yes, let's do one here. Absolutely. Let's get one going. And it's free to sign up as a coach. It's free to take the class. If you want to help put people through the Constitution, it costs us about $5 a person. So, if you're feeling like, hey, you know what, I want 1,000 people to go to the Constitution class, that $200 donation can be made at patriotacademy.com. Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to ask you this question. I can answer it, but I'm going to test your knowledge. What is the process for getting a convention of states, and how far are we from it taking place?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's really 3 steps. Number 1, the states have to call for it. So you got to have 34 states that call for the convention. They pass a resolution, both chambers, except for Nebraska, with only one chamber. have to call for it. And then when they gather, you've got to have an amendment that actually passes the convention as a suggestion. And as Mark said, that's 26 of the 50, so you just have to have a simple majority. And then the third step is it goes back to all 50 states. So really, each state gets at least 3 cracks at this. They get a crack at it in their legislature to say, yes, we want a suggestion convention to take place. Then whoever they send to that convention, those commissioners have the opportunity to influence what's going to be sent back to the states. But no matter what happens there, it comes back to your state, and your legislature has to approve it, or as Mark said, do nothing. So it's really a 3-step process to get it there.
And so far, 19 out of the necessary 34 states have passed a call for the convention. Both houses of the state have to call for that convention in the same session. 19 so far. North Carolina is the closest one right now. They have a 2-year session. Last year, they passed it in the House. Working on the Senate right now. I got some good news this morning I haven't shared with you yet, but I think we're going to get it done in North Carolina. That'll be number 20. Kansas actually passed it last year. Weird legal nuance. Their state constitution says it requires a 2/3 vote in each house of the legislature to call for an Article 5 convention. Weird constitutional nuance there. We call that the Roe rule because that literally got added to their constitution the year after Roe versus Wade. They're trying to prevent a convention ever happening to overturn Roe versus Wade. That's unconstitutional because it's a restriction at the state level on a federal right for the state to call a convention. That's being litigated by a couple of legislators.
And then a lot of states where it's we've got it working through the process. So,
multiple states where Ohio looks really good for this year. Pennsylvania just came out of a committee. We expect a Senate vote in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to head there pretty soon. And so Pennsylvania looks pretty good. And then I'm saying next year, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, those are kind of my key target states that I think are getting really close. And part of that's just going to be, by the way, this is really important to note, our folks are heavily involved in elections in all of these states. There are laws that say what we can and can't do as an organization, but on the ground, our individual folks are heavily involved, and they're going to work to change the legislatures. If people are going to be unfriendly to COS, then our folks are probably not going to be so friendly in the elections. So we're going to see some electoral activity across the states this year, moving legislatures closer to calling conventions.
And some people question whether we should be that adamant about that. Is this issue that important? I've come to the conclusion we don't save the republic without doing this. I don't see any way we keep from going to civil war and this nation splitting if we keep electing whoever wins the president and the majority in Congress and gets to determine the Supreme Court gets to tell all 50 states how to live their lives. As long as the federal government is trying to be so involved and up in our kitchen on everything that we do, we're going to beat each other's throats across this country because we are split in many ways in this nation. And restoring federalism gives us the ability to be split in this nation, but still be a nation. And the only reason we come together anyway, I know, I like you people and you like me maybe. I don't know, somebody might hate me, but the only reason we are together as a nation is for war, commerce, and travel. That's it. That's what the Constitution authorizes us to do together. Let's have commerce together. Let's be able to move among the states if you want to, and we need to be there together to protect each other. I got no business telling you how to educate kids in Wyoming. I got no business telling you how to live your life and how much taxes you should pay here in Wyoming and all of that stuff. That's why we've got to get this done. It really is that important. So I'm like Mark. I'm kind of at this point where I might be with you on everything, but if you're not willing to help us save the country on this, I'm gonna support somebody else for that office in order to get in there and get this done, so that you even have the freedom to vote on all those other issues that we really care about. Because right now the feds are taking that power away from you. Okay, okay, what prevents state representatives from modifying Article 5, lowering the threshold below three-fourths to adopt amendments? Okay, I think what they mean is the state representatives or whoever the actual delegates are at the convention. What keeps them from making a change on how it would be ratified? And where this comes from, I think for a lot of people, and I had confusion about this too. In fact, I even called early on when I first started learning about this, I called Article 5 a con-con. I actually thought Article 5 was a constitutional convention. I had that totally wrong because I didn't understand that it has to be amendments to this Constitution, and I didn't understand because I hadn't read a lot of what the founders had said on the subject. I understood, no, actually, the only thing you can do is amend the Constitution itself. Now, you could send back an amendment to all 50 states saying, okay, we got a whole new Constitution we want you to ratify. Does anybody in this room actually think that you can get 38 states to do that? It's absolutely impossible. So it's very different from the Federal Convention of 1787. They wouldn't be able to do that under Article 5, but that is a big concern because, like me, a lot of people just haven't walked through that process.
Well, and that question specifically is about the threshold for ratifying an amendment.
Yeah.
Because there's an argument that's made about the 1787 convention that they changed the ratification methodology. It's actually not true because it required all states to ratify the new ratification methodology, which they all did. So, I mean, once again, the convention had no authority. All they could do is say, hey, we think y'all ought to do this. In this case, this convention, that's not within the call of the convention. In other words, every state is passing the same application, and there's nothing in that application that would allow the delegates to debate, discuss, or propose out of convention a reduction of the ratification threshold for an amendment.
You know, Mark, we ought to expound on this one a little bit because that kind of leads into the next argument, which is what do you do with out of control folks that might go to the convention and not uphold whatever Wyoming, for instance, wanted to send them to be willing to do or not do. And, you know, I go back to the early Continental Congresses and the way that they respected the fact that, well, part of it was respect, part of it was just self-preservation. In other words, if you send somebody to the convention and they go against everything you told them to do when you sent them there, it's kind of like sending your kid out to the grocery store to go buy, you know, milk and bread, and they come back with nothing but chocolate chip cookies. Are you just going to say, don't worry about that, let's just enjoy the chocolate? No, you know, somebody's probably getting a spanking, you ain't ever sending them back to the grocery store, and they're probably not getting dinner. All right, there's no way you're just going to rubber stamp that. Your legislature is not going to rubber stamp and say, oh, don't worry about it. You broke all the rules. You disobeyed everything we told you to do, but we'll just go ahead and rubber stamp it. And also, there's just kind of an honor thing to this thing, that you represent your state. You're going to go represent your state and what you think your state legislature is going to ratify when you send it back home. And that's what they did. You even had delegations that they literally wrote back to their state legislature, and they said, hey, is it okay if we change on this position? We've been convinced that now we do need to declare independence, is the example I'm thinking of. And they got permission to change and now declare independence. Or they got called home and somebody else was sent there to do the will of the state. So I just think that's a real important thing for us to recognize. There's a process to this. And even though you may really disagree with a lot of those people, believe me, I got folks in the state legislature of Texas I can't stand that I know are probably going to be part of the delegation to go because they've got some of that power. And that's okay, because I also know, even though I don't like them, and even though I don't like their style, and even though we disagree on a lot of things, their self-interest is going to bring the power back to Texas, and then I can fight the fight right there.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing that's really important. Most of you have insurance policies of some kind. A lot of you are business people. It means you've had an insurance agent probably at some point in your life. And so there's something called agency law that controls the relationship between you and your agent. If you say to an insurance agent, you want to get an insurance policy, just a basic liability policy on your ranch or your farm, and you say, hey, look, I want $1 million liability policy, and you give them the authority to go out and bind you to that $1 million liability policy. If they come back and say, man, you are so lucky because I found you a $10 million policy, it's only going to cost you 3 times as much though, so write the check. Are you bound by that? And the answer is no, because that agent didn't have authority. You did not give that agent authority to do that thing on your behalf. That means their action is null and void is the legal term. It's as if it never happened. And the same is true for delegates to a convention or commissioners to a convention. Their authority is limited by the commission that they carry with them that says what their authority is. If they exceed that authority, if they vote in convention, I vote to repeal the Second Amendment, that vote literally does not count because they don't have the authority on behalf of the state who gives them the authority to cast that vote. And so the idea that these delegates can get out of control goes against human nature. But can you imagine you get appointed by your state legislature, people who obviously respect you enough that they're going to appoint you to do this historic thing, which is going to be done before the entire American public. It's all going to be video, live, broadcast. Everybody's going to know everything you're doing, every breath you take, every bathroom break you take, and you're just going to go there and go, you know what? This is fun. I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want to do. And that belies human nature. Human beings do not act like that. Maybe one person goes crazy, but the idea that a whole convention is just going to go hog wild and do whatever the heck they want, it just doesn't make any sense.
And it also goes back to what flipped the switch for me, is that even if they did, what has to happen next?
Gotta ratify.
You gotta go back to all 50 states, and you gotta, those very, very people that you disobeyed when you went and did that have to rubber stamp what you were gonna do.
So I said I was gonna read every one of these, but I think we've answered this one, but I just wanna read it. I don't want you to think your questions got skipped. It says that the convention is called, is there the possibility of the abolishment of the Constitution and or the whole of our republic, or just the removal of laws and politicians? And the answer is, it's limited by the call to convention. In other words, there are these three things: term limits on federal officials and members of Congress, imposition of fiscal restraints, and imposition of scope and jurisdiction restraints. That's it. That's all they can do in that convention. They can't do whatever they want. They can't abolish the government. This is an outrageous claim that's made by people that has no basis in law or fact, or tradition or history. And this is really an important piece of this that I want to, whoever said this, thank you. It's a little bit duplicative, but there's a history here. One of the things that I hear from our opponents very regularly was that the 1787 convention was a runaway convention. Anybody ever hear that? 1780, they just went there and they did whatever. They were supposed to go and just amend the Articles of Confederation, is what we hear, right? But those men, they went there and they just did whatever the heck they wanted, and they created a whole new government. And this is a life's passion for me. I'm a great admirer of the framers of the United States Constitution. Anybody here admire the framers of our Constitution, right? Men of honor and integrity for the most part, I would argue. Honor was held in such high esteem in 1787 that literally, if I said, hey, you're a liar, you could challenge me to a duel in most jurisdictions, you could kill me, and that's legal, because I just called you a liar. This is the level that they held honor at, right? I mean, it was above everything else, your reputation and your honor. And those who would say that the 1787 convention was a runaway convention, those guys ignored their instructions, did whatever they want. They're saying George Washington was a dishonorable man. Sitting as president of convention, he's like, well, I know we got some rules, but we're just gonna do whatever we want. Madison just did whatever the heck he wanted because he thought it was kind of cool to do whatever he wanted. This is an outrageous slander against the framers. It's lasted through a lot of our history. The idea of a runaway convention started in 1973, roughly, right after Roe versus Wade. It was invented by Chief Justice Warren Burger. Anybody recognize that name? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Burger's the guy who gave us Roe versus Wade. He's the Chief Justice. And he said to a great conservative woman, Phyllis Schlafly, we can't possibly hold a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade, because if we did that, we might lose our beloved Constitution in a runaway convention. Nobody thought there was a runaway convention until the 1970s. That was invented by the left to keep us conservatives from using the Constitution to save the Constitution. It's an outrageous slander, and I'm going to prove to you absolutely that this is a lie. About 13 years ago, Professor Rob Nadelson went to the National Archives and he opened a drawer and looked at documents that had not been looked at since the drafting of the Constitution. I can't even imagine that. Like, I picture him pulling out the drawer and blowing off the dust, right? Probably not really like that.
Was Nicolas Cage with him?
Maybe. That's what I picture, for sure. After hours, maybe they have to break in, right? Yeah. And he pulls out the actual commissions that were carried by these guys that went to the convention in 1787. They had paperwork. Nothing was digital. They carried paper with them. And this gives them their authority from their state. And 7 states commissioned their commissioners before Congress ever even got involved. And the commissions say the commissioner has any and all authority necessary to render the federal Constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. Any and all authority necessary. They didn't say, just amend the Articles of Confederation, that's all you can do. They didn't put limits on their authority. These folks knew they had a serious problem. The Union was falling apart. It was not working. They faced existential threats, and they gave these guys authority. There were 2 actual states who didn't have the authority. They didn't vote at convention because they were honorable men, and they didn't have the authority. One of them lost their quorum, and the other just did not have the authority to do this, anything other than amend the article. So they didn't even vote. These were honorable men who lived up to the calling, and I think it's just, I'm going to spend my life correcting that slander against the framers.
Yeah, and I know there's got to be somebody in the room that's thinking, yeah, but, Mark, we don't have George Washingtons. We don't have, James Madisons, and our people are worse today than they were back then. Well, I share a lot of biblical verses that would, dispute that fact. We're still depraved. They were depraved. They were sinners. They did evil things just like you and just like me, right? So, but I do think we do have to recognize that even if all that stuff goes off the rail and they decide they're not honorable and they do everything, what's still got to happen? We got to go back to the 50 states and 38 states. We can't forget that. Now, I want to say one other thing, because Mark talked about it being on the news and everything being video. I'm a nerd. I'm just telling you, even if no amendment gets suggested and no amendment gets ratified, this will be the greatest constitution lesson our nation has ever had. Because let's say the convention goes for 3 months, and those guys are debating all these different things. They're talking about Wicker v. Filburn, they're talking about the proper role of the federal government, they're talking about the Commerce Clause, and how to do all these things. That's gonna be happening for the entire nation. We're all gonna be glued to this thing, watching to see what happens, and we're gonna be learning things about the Constitution that we didn't know. I just think that will be amazing, regardless of whether or not we actually.
Yeah, I agree with that, you know.
It'd be good for the country.
A lot of people say we need more education about the Constitution. What an incredible debate to have, which is the fundamental debate in this call is what's the proper role of the federal government vis-a-vis the states? Like, what's the right balance of power? What a cool thing to be debating at a national level. All right, here's a question. Almost 250 years, it hasn't happened yet. Why? And so this is a two-part question. The second part is, half the country was against the government during the Civil War. Was it close to the COS then?
So the answer to the first question,
I can answer.
I would say it's because it's the, breaking case of emergency, and that's where we are. I don't think we've been to the critical mass. I take that back. They probably did feel like they were there in 1861. The difference in 1861, though, in my opinion, would be that it was nearly a singular issue civil war, and it wasn't so much a completely out of control federal government like we're dealing with now. It was very different in terms of what was driving it, and I'm not sure even a convention of states could have solved that debate. Because think about it, if you had a convention and you could get the requisite number, one way or the other, half the country is still going to want to go to war, right? So it would have been, it was just a very different scenario.
Yeah, they made an attempt at it in 1861. So I'd say, they got close.
Yeah.
But they didn't call it under Article 5. It wasn't done that way. It was just a convention of states. They tried to get together. They tried to prevent the Civil War from happening, and obviously they failed. So look, I think it's never happened because it's really hard to do, right? My wife asks me all the time, did we have to choose this? Could you choose something a little bit easier? This is the highest bar in our entire system of governance. There's literally nothing harder to do. Right? There's nothing else that requires 2/3 of states just to ask for a meeting. I mean, think how hard that is. You can't get your own legislature in Wyoming to agree on most things. Now think about getting 34 states to all agree on the subject matter for a convention. How hard is that? And then the idea that once you get there, you've got to now agree 26 states on what to do and 38 states around. That's ridiculously hard. The framers wanted
As it should be
really
hard. That's
yeah.
right, should
but
be.
They didn't want us amending the Constitution willy-nilly because they knew that all kinds of social fads, stuff would happen, things would come and go, and we just add all kinds of stuff to the Constitution. And I'm embarrassed to say it, I've said it a couple times, I'm from California, they have over 600 amendments to the California Constitution now. It's like a code book, it's not like a Constitution anymore. Everything's in the Constitution. In California, everything's in the Constitution. And so we don't want that. Also, what they wanted it to take years and millions of people. That's what they wanted. They wanted you to have to build momentum, because I want you to understand something about constitutional amendments. They don't change anything in this country. No constitutional amendments have ever changed the fabric of our society, the way we operate our society. They're what I refer to as legal capstones. If you've ever built any kind of a pillar or a post on any stonework, you build your stone post and you put a capstone on it, right? The capstone's like, this is done, this is now permanent. If you don't put a capstone on it, the rain gets in, the weather gets in, that thing will deteriorate from inside. A constitutional amendment is a capstone. People will say to you, hey, the 13th and 14th Amendment did away with slavery. No, they didn't. The Civil War did away with slavery. 13th and 14th Amendment were our country saying, we're done with this and we're never doing this again, right? Even, for example, the women's right to vote, right? So women's right to vote, there were already women voting all over the country. In all kinds of states, there were women serving in state legislatures all over the country. The country had already decided that they wanted to do this. So people rallied for it, said, we've already decided, boom, you put a capstone on it. This is true of how all amendments work. This is why I don't think anything crazy can come out of convention. Also, is because it's got to be something that everybody already totally agrees on. We all agree we need term limits. We need an amendment with a capstone on top of it that says, hey, we all agree on this stuff. We all agree we got to handle our finances better. We got to have some kind of balanced budget amendment. The pillar is built.
In fact, I'll give you a bad example of that, 17th Amendment, which I disagree with. Most states were already doing that. They were having elections for who that U.S. Senator was gonna be, and then the legislature would just rubber stamp what the election results were, and so officially, they had, before the 17th Amendment, the legislature got to send the U.S. Senator. I think we ought to go back to that, but frankly, the nation had decided differently, and it's a hard one to win, because you gotta, convince people of federalism and why the legislature should be able to hold the Senate accountable, blah, 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 that's a whole different topic.
All right, what do you got next?
Explain nullification applied by all states via the 10th Amendment. I would say we have to define terms first, right? So when we say the word nullification, that means different things to different people. It typically means to most people, a single state can say no to a federal law and just say, we're nullifying that law within our state. Okay, that in and of itself, generally speaking, is not constitutional. So the 10th Amendment does not say you get to nullify any law. The 10th Amendment specifically says that if the federal government is not given the power in the Constitution, it's left to the states or the people. Now, the problem is that you have the court redefining that, and so that creates all this confusion. The founders debated this a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, and you probably all heard of the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and what some people say Madison and Jefferson were for single state nullification. They weren't. They always argued that it had to be multiple states, that you had to band together and essentially nullify federal law together by getting a majority of the states to do so. So when people call for nullification, they're just wanting the silver bullet, which I would love to have, right? I'd love to have the ability to say what a lot of people say to Joe Biden right now at race car. I would love to be able to just do that and be done, right? But you can't. It's just if you buy into the idea that single state nullification is okay on any particular law, it's okay on every particular law. And now there is no federal government. There is no, and I know some of us might go, well, you know what? Maybe that's not a good idea. We still need to be together as a nation. So anyway, we have a whole section in our Constitution class on this, walking through the history of nullification in this country, all the different attempts by several people who tried it. Presidents pushed for it in different times throughout history. It's never worked. So the proper nullification of a federal law is an amendment to the Constitution. That's how you nullify federal law constitutionally, with, like you're saying, a capstone, so that issue is settled, at least until you reach a super majority of the country to want to go the other direction. Nullification by itself will not work. Now, I will say there is a time to say no to the federal government, like this Title IX thing. That's, first of all, that's not a federal law. That's the stroke of a pen from a senile president. But you can say no to that. We're not going to use our money or our resources in our state to do what is an unconstitutional law, but you're doing that while on appeal. In other words, you take your stand, you say, we're not going to do that, but in the meantime, we're suing the federal government to get a ruling from the Supreme Court that what we're doing is the right position, or you're working on a convention of states. An amendment process is an appeal. It's the ultimate appeal. So I support single state nullification of a federal unconstitutional law while on appeal. It's not even really nullification. It's really single state moratorium on that law while that thing is, it's almost like having a restraining order in a way, but it's the state legislature that's doing that restraining order. I know that's in the weeds a little bit and a little bit muddy, but don't fall for this idea. People will say, we don't need convention of states because we can just nullify that law. It's not constitutional, and it leads to anarchy. I mean, George Washington talked about how it would lead to anarchy.
Sanctuary cities are nullification in a sense.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
We don't like those. I mean, we don't think that's okay. I want to add one thing to that. When you're doing politics, which is unfortunately what we do, I don't like politics, but it's what we do for a living. When you're doing politics, you got to play in the world of reality. And I got a lot of people I talk to, and they have fantasies about how politics works. And, some of these people, I call them the 100%ers, right? If you don't get 100% of everything, then those people are really bad. You got to get rid of them, and and that's not reality. That's not how life works. Has that ever worked in your life that way? In your job, in your family, in your
toddler when they didn't walk perfectly the first time? Well, just don't even do it at all.
How about in your marriage? If you got 100% in your marriage, I guarantee you're divorced at this point, right? That's only 100%. And so it just doesn't work that way. And so we got to be real. And when you talk about nullification, politics is a game of convincing people, getting people onto your side, talking to people. Narrative matters. The way you talk about stuff matters just as much as the idea itself. You can have the best idea. If you can't express that idea in a way that compels people, then you're going to lose the fight. And I'm going to tell you what happens when you talk about nullification. There's a huge portion of the country, when you say the word nullification, they say the word, in their mind, slavery. Oh, I get it. Y'all want to bring back the South. you're Confederates, right? This is all about slavery and Confederacy. You don't want to be saying, no, I'm not trying to bring back slavery. That's not the discussion you want to have. It's a bad narrative to have in this country to talk about nullification, because we got a history, the biggest
Calhoun was the biggest champion for
Right.
it. Yeah.
So the biggest nullification argument in the history of the country is that the slave states could keep slavery, just nullify anything that the federal government did. You just don't want to have that discussion. And then there's one last piece of practical political advice that I give to people who say, well, we should just nullify. I'm like, so how many states are doing this right now? None. Zero. I'm like, hey, well, when you got 19 states and a movement with 5 million people, give me a call, and maybe I'll be interested in helping you all out. It's not happening because it's not practical, it's not real, it's not the real world. You know, I have a bunch of friends, Rick, who are libertarians, and God bless libertarians. I love them. I mean, I would say when I was younger, that was kind of I was an idealistic libertarian probably. And the thing about libertarians is they don't live in the real world. They live in this fantasy. Wouldn't it be awesome if there was no government and everything was just perfect, right? That's libertarianism. Like, it'd be so perfect. Nobody would steal from anybody. Nobody would hurt anybody. So look, I love my libertarian friends, but they don't live in the world of real politics. We all live in the real world. And by the way, if you don't live in reality, if you don't want to pay attention to reality, that's okay, because I promise you, reality is going to pay attention to you. And you are going to run face first into it at some point. And some of our friends who get elected to the legislature, and they're what I call the 100%ers, everything's going to be perfect. They're going 100% conservative all the time. They're going to run face first into the wall of reality in a legislature. Because a legislature itself, and this is important for y'all to know, there's a bunch of fights that have taken place in your state. I'm seeing them all over the country. A legislature is a place where people get together and they have discussions and they make compromises. And I know that's a bad word to some people in politics. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I don't like the compromises they have to make. But God bless the people that are willing to go into those legislatures and have to eat the crow sometimes and have to deal with people they don't like and have to make compromises, because their job is to govern. Their job is not to be ideologically perfect. We see this in Washington, D.C. right now, and there's people in Washington, D.C. They say stuff, by the way, I'm not going to name names and attack particular people, but there are people who grandstand and they say stuff and they're just bloviating on Twitter or X or whatever. And by the way, I read their stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, heck yeah, I like that. And I'm like, but there's not the votes to do that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we even do a talk at our Patriot Academy Leadership Congress. It's called The Art of Compromise. And I used to be one of those guys that thought, oh, that's a dirty word. Because I thought that meant you're compromising your principles. No, you're doing the Ronald Reagan thing. I'll take half the loaf today, and then I'm going to keep coming back and working for the rest of the loaf. I couldn't even get, in my first session, a long time ago, had never passed a pro-life bill in Texas history since Roe v. Wade had happened. And it was my freshman year, and we were trying to get parental notification. That was the most we could get in that legislative body. That's not even saying the parent could veto and say, no, you're not going to kill my grandbaby. That's just saying you got to notify the parent when you kill their grandbaby. That was the best we could get. And so when we're getting it done, and all the pro-life groups were with us to get that done as a first step, incremental step, but because we couldn't get the death penalty for the doctor if they did it and didn't notify, we were called pro-abortion for that, for simply compromising on what the punishment was. We wanted a higher punishment than $10,000 or whatever it ended up being. I don't remember, it was a long time ago. But we couldn't get quite to where some folks wanted it to be, and so we were the bad guys now. I'm pro-abortion because I'm trying to get this first step. Well, I mean, we finally got that done. Then we got parental actual consent, and then we got informed consent, and then we got more and more and more, and then ultimately we outlawed all abortion in Texas. And the author of that was my friend Brian Hughes, who I recruited for the legislature after being in college together and seeing the baby feet on his lapel and saying 35 years ago, hey, you and I are going to get along great, we're going to someday probably serve together. Recruited him to run for the legislature. Now he's Senator Brian Hughes, and ended abortion in Texas. It takes compromise to get there. You're not going to get all of it unless they make me the benevolent dictator. We're going to have to be able to. So, but there is an art to it, and it's funny you mentioned that, because the next question that I had up on my stack here: how do we encourage people of different views to find compromise situations, even at the convention? I think is what they mean, but in a time where it appears so divided. You know, this is part of why I am such an adamant advocate for biblical principles and being a biblical citizen. Can you imagine a society where people actually treated each other the way they want to be treated. Have you ever heard that before? I think it's written down somewhere. Maybe in an old book. Yeah, an old book that maybe is the instruction manual for life. Imagine if you lived in neighborhoods where we treated each other the way we wanted to be treated. Well, that's what I would encourage anybody going into the convention or in the legislature. Treat that person, even that you disagree with, treat them the way you want to be treated. So how would I want to be treated? Well, if somebody really disliked me because of my positions, how would I want to be treated? I'd probably want them to give me a chance to explain what my position is. I'd probably want to hear why they believe what they believe. See, if we're treating each other the way we want to be treated, we can have civil discourse even though we have very differing viewpoints. Now, you may think that means I'm some kind of, wuss, and I'm not. Listen, I'm a rock-solid conservative that will go to the mat and fight. And I get righteously angry and give fiery speeches that fire up people. I get mad too, all right? But I also understand you're not going to win at the end of the day unless you're treating people the way you want to be treated. And by the way, just a side note, I know this has nothing to do with Commission of States, but if you're a pastor in the room and you've been told to stay away from politics, politics is how do you treat your neighbor. Every law that's passed is all about how are we going to treat our neighbors. What's going to be legal in our communities and not legal? What's the punishment going to be? How would I want to be treated in court? That sort of everything is how you treat your neighbor. And to stay away from how we treat our neighbors, or to think that there's anything that the Bible doesn't speak to, or to think, I got a friend, Pastor Paul Blair, he always says to pastors, hey pastors, what part of your life is the Lord not Lord over? Because that's the only thing you ought to be staying away from in the pulpit, right? Because it applies to everything in our life. So I bring all that up to say, if you want civil discourse, start being biblical citizens. We need to treat each other the way we want to be treated. And that's just one part of being a biblical citizen. How about living in a neighborhood where people actually think murder's wrong? That'd be kind of nice. What if you lived in a neighborhood where people thought rape was wrong and lying was wrong? How about living in a neighborhood where people actually raise their kids to honor their father and mother? I know those sound like radical ideas, but that's what it means to be biblical citizens.
All right, keep going. You got a bigger stack.
Okay, let's see. Regarding your response about a runaway convention, many state legislatures are majority liberal, even in conservative states. That's true. What makes you trust them? Nothing. I don't trust them. I don't trust them. I put some trust in the process, right? And actually, it's my trust that they will follow their self-interest that makes me think this is a good idea. That's my answer.
I just don't think there's any trust required. If there was trust required in our system of governance, I could ask this question, like, how can you vote for that person, right? It's like, I'm not voting for my pastor. I got one Lord and Savior already. I'm done with that. Sometimes I'm choosing the best choice among two evils, right? The lesser of two evils. If we look at politics and that politics is just for good people, well, then there won't be any politics, because none of us are really good people, right? We're all sinners. We're all fallen. It's not about trusting people. It's about trusting structure and process.
Is the Convention of States a sovereign movement? I'm not sure what that means necessarily, so I don't know. You want to?
Yeah, I've heard people talk about the sovereign citizen movement. I don't honestly know.
Oh, yeah. I do hear that sometimes. Yeah, there's a lot of those silver bullet kind of things where people are coming up with ideas they're right in thinking things are falling apart. We need a better way. How do we fix the system? But there's some people out there that are promoting some. Honestly, I think they're kind of crazy ideas. I mean, because they're not rooted in law, they're not rooted in fact, they're not rooted in our Constitution, and maybe they go back to some, they try to find some English law thing or whatever, but it doesn't have a history in our nation, and so they're grasping at straws, and I understand, I get it, they're just wanting to improve the system, but I'm going, wait a minute, we've got a system that works, if we work it. We need to work the system we got, not try to create a new one. So
I guess I would have to say no, because I don't even really know exactly what that is.
Okay, I don't know, man. This one, I don't know the answer to this. Is Trump and QAnon with us?
Yeah, well, I know Trump, but I don't know QAnon, so hard for me to say.
Has Trump ever spoken out about QAnon?
No, but I did have a conversation with him.
Did you really?
I really did.
I'm curious about this one, yeah.
This is actually a horrifying thing that happened to me. So I was at a donor event in Palm Beach, Florida, which is the fancy part of the country, right? Like super wealthy people. You can tell I just fit right in Palm Beach, Florida. And I was at a dinner with a donor at a restaurant with my wife, Patty. And Patty's sitting across the table from me, and I'm sitting, and this guy's with us at this table. And this guy's literally worth $25 billion. Like, so much money. I don't even know what that means when somebody's worth that much money. So we're sitting at this table, and he says, yeah, I'm supposed to have dinner with Trump on Friday night. Are you guys going to be around on Friday night? And we're like, we don't know. Like, I'm looking at Patty, like, what's going on? Is he going to invite us? And he goes, I can't go. Do you want to go for me?
Wow.
Excuse me? Yeah, I'm like, and his girlfriend, because when you're worth 25 billion, you usually don't have a wife, you got a girlfriend. It's like 30 years younger than you, right? And so his girlfriend goes, "Oh, Peter, they can't afford the $100,000 to go to that dinner." I'm like, yeah, and he goes, "Oh, that's okay. We'll just pay for the dinner," and they can. Like he was sending me to Burger King. Like it was unbelievable. I looked across the table at Patty like, what is going on?
Hey, Mark, you didn't take me on that trip.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I'm not going to take you on a fancy date like that. So I go to this dinner, right? And it turns out it's not even a dinner. It's literally like a meet and greet for President Trump. And so I walk in, it's at Mar-a-Lago. I go into Mar-a-Lago, I'm definitely out of place, right? This is all high-end donors, people who are writing personal $100,000 checks, and then there's Mark Meckler. And you can tell, like, they all know each other. I'm over in the corner, like, eating peanuts out of a bowl. And I got a picture with President Trump, which I probably just look like this, you know, because I have no idea what's going on. And then they bring us into this room, they send us to this long table, and I mean, when I say long, it's like almost as long as this room, right? And so they've got like the biggest donors in the party right at the center of the table, because that's where Trump's sitting, right in the middle. There's people all the way around the table. Trump's there. All the figures you know around Trump are there, like all the famous people. The chairman of the party was there. Todd Ricketts, who was their chief fundraiser. I'm way down at the end, right? I need binoculars to see the president. And so I'm sitting down there, and this guy, Tomas, who gave me this money, Petterfee, said, you know, just ask him about convention states. I just want you to get a chance to ask him, so I'll get you in front of him. I'll spend the money, you get in front of him, you ask him. So I'm down at the end of the table like this, you know, anybody have a question for the president? You know, I'm down here at the end. Of course, nobody calls on me. They're calling on all the big donors in the center of the table. There's no food. This is a dinner, no food. You know what was on the table?
A bottle.
That's it. Not even Trump water. It's just like this basic plastic bottle of water for $100,000. That's the most expensive bottle of water I ever had. And so I'm there, and then at some point, like Secret Service come over, and they're like, "Mr. President, you have to go to your next event." And I'm sitting at this table thinking, "Oh my God, somebody paid $100,000 for me to be here to talk to Trump." And I'm supposed to go back to their house afterwards. They're having some fancy party, and Patty's back there, and I'm supposed to go tell them what happened when I asked Trump about convention of states. And like, I got nowhere even near the president. So this thing, I'm having a panic attack, and you may not believe this, I'm kind of an introverted guy. Like, I don't really like to put myself in the middle of stuff like that. My wife will walk up to anybody, I'm not like that. But I'm having this panic attack because this guy wrote this big check. I'm supposed to ask the question. And I'm supposed to go, he's having a dinner party. I'm supposed to go back and report, right? Can you imagine go back
In front of the dinner party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the $100,000. I don't know what happened.
I had a great bottle of water, though. I just went.
I brought the bottle home for you as a souvenir. And so people are clearing out of the room, and it's actually kind of a blur, I have to admit, because it was so intense. And so I see Trump, and he's standing there, and the Secret Service is around him, and there's a couple standing in front of him talking to him. And I'm like, I just got to go talk to him. I'm just going to walk up. I'm going to go talk to the president. And so I literally just stroll across the room. Everybody's leaving. And I walk a different direction, and it's like I feel like I'm going to get tackled by the Secret Service. And I walk up, and I just kind of muscle my way between two Secret Service guys and turn, and now I'm facing the president. There's this couple standing there with me. It's the three of us, and this, I don't even know where they're from. They're like, my husband's running for governor, and we love your endorsement. And I'm just standing there like looking at them. They're probably looking at me like, who is this guy? And so they finish, and Trump's like, well, you know, great, we'll take a look at that. And Trump just looks at me, and I go, "Oh, Mr. President, your friend Sean Hannity, a good friend of mine, said to come say hello to you." Because I do know Sean, and I know he's a huge fan of Sean. I don't even know why I said that. Like, it just came out of my mouth. And Trump goes, "Oh, man, I love Sean Hannity. That guy's so great." So now I got him. Like, we're talking. He's like, "How do you know Sean?" And I go, "Oh, well, Sean's an endorser of our project." And he goes, "Oh, well, what's your project?" And I said, "Well, it's called Convention of States." "Oh, I never heard of that. Tell me about it." And I'm like, "Well, Mr. Trump, President Trump, when you gave your first inaugural address, you had a line in that address. I think it's the best line in the history of inaugural addresses." Trump likes when you say stuff like that. And I said, "You said that this inauguration was not a transfer of power from one administration to another, and not even really from one party to another. It was a transfer of power from Washington, D.C. back to the people of the United States." And he goes, "Yeah, that was pretty good, wasn't it?" I don't do a good Trump impersonation, I apologize. And so he says that, and I said, "So, Mr. President, calling a convention of states would allow you to do that permanently. We can take the power away from Washington, D.C., give it back to the people of the states." And I said, and by the way, President Trump, if we do this while you're president, you'll be the only president in history ever to live through one of these things. I said, Washington didn't do it, Lincoln didn't do it, Reagan didn't do it. It'll be only President Trump was alive during one of these things. He goes, I love the sound of that. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. They're like, Mr. President, you gotta go. And I'm like completely soaked with sweat. I'm the last guy to leave. And I went back to the party. I have never talked to him since about it. I know people who've talked to him about it. I've heard generally that he's positive towards it. I have people inside, very close inside the Trump camp, who say that it's something that they believe he would take up after his first 100 days in office and potentially champion that as a legacy thing. But that's the extent of my conversation with President Trump about it.
Good for you. Yeah. Good for you.
I have one Trump comment. I don't know Trump, I've never met Trump, but I noticed a change in Trump, with all of this lawfare and the destruction of our legal system. It's not just Trump. When you see Trump getting all this, it's happening to so many people. And I'm actually glad in a way that it's kind of like the Columbia and all the universities and all this stuff boiling over. We've said for years, that's the rot that's been taught in our classrooms, in these universities for years. So it's good that now everybody else sees it happening. Same thing with the lawfare. Because they went after Trump, people are now realizing, like the praying grandma and others, they've been on the receiving end of this as well. Anyway, the difference I saw in Trump was, you remember I would say lock her up in 2016 and all the rallies and everything, and then in January 2017, he's literally like praising Bill and Hillary Clinton in that event in the rotunda there, and then didn't do it. And I think he really believed, oh, that's just campaign talk. We're all on the same side. We all want America to prosper. And once the campaign's over, everybody's going to govern in a way that's good for America. You watched the Tucker interview of him last summer. And when he makes the statement, these people really do hate America. You look him in the eyes when he says that, and you can tell he realizes now that there are literally Marxists in this country, that there are people that want to undermine everything about who we are, and there's just a difference there. I think there's a real difference, and if he does win in November, I think we'll see a totally different concentration on truly draining the swamp. Now, I don't think he can do it by himself. I don't think he can do it with a Congress. We have to do this. But he can at least put a stop to some of the abuse while he's in office. Yeah. He didn't do that in his first 4 years, right? A lot of that abuse was still going on. He can stop it if he drains the swamp of DOJ and FBI and ATF and all that while he's in office. But if you don't do constitutional amendments, whoever comes next, and the pendulum always swings, they'll go right back to what Joe Biden's been doing for the last 3 years.
All right, we have 2 more questions, because I said we would do all of them, and I want to make sure we do that. I don't want anybody to feel like we skipped their question. This says that if Convention of States comes into being, who organizes the chaos of changing government? And so I'm not sure I exactly understand the question. If you mean, like, how's it going to be organized after the convention and there's all this change that's supposed to happen? One of the things that I believe would come out of convention is almost anything that would create major change will likely have some form of grandfather clause in it. Like, I want to do away with most of these administrative agencies. They're not going to shut down the day that the 38th state ratifies an amendment.
Right, there has to be a phase in.
There's going to be a phase in. So I believe that the convention will build into any potential amendment something that creates a period of transition to avoid the chaos. I mean, you could create intense chaos, right? If you just say balance the budget tomorrow, honestly, the world economy would crash overnight if you tried to do that. So I think everything will be phased in.
Agreed.
This one says, Article 1, Section 10 says no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in the payment of debts. Fiat money is debt slavery. How is this all legal? Would gold and silver as legal tender reduce all government overreach? I'm going to flip that to you.
I'm a big fan of Kevin Freeman, Economic War Room. If you're not watching that, you can go to Patriot U, which is patriotacademy.tv, and watch his show, or a lot of other places on the Blaze and some other networks. But Kevin, I'm working with Kevin right now in about 20 legislatures to try to pass transactional gold, which would give all of us the ability to basically use a credit card that draws on your gold in the state depository. And Texas already has a gold bullion depository. Whatever state passes this first, and there's a lot of competition, and we're all kind of almost like a sports match, talking trash to each other to see who's going to win and get it done first. Because whichever state actually does it, they're going to make a ton of money on that little 1% fee that the credit card companies normally make. It's a really good step in the right direction of getting, essentially a solid, reliable currency that you can use. So anyway, that's one thing that doesn't have anything to do with convention of states. We don't need an amendment to the Constitution to be able to do this. Article 1, Section 10 still gives states the right to do that. They just haven't done it yet.
Okay, we're getting ready to close down. There's two stories that I'd like to close with. I'll tell one, I want you to tell the other.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna tell the story of Levi Preston, and if you could do John Quincy Adams, I would love that. Since you're the guy that taught me that story.
All right, you got it.
And I taught you the Levi Preston story, so it seems appropriate. By the way, one thing, this is a side story I gotta tell you. So tonight, Rick and I go out to dinner. I had a couple of legislators with us, and went to the Rib and Chop House. And yeah, anytime I can get a good steak or something like that, I'm pretty excited about that. So we went there, go in, it's cold and rainy. I look at that menu, and on that menu is bison chili.
Doesn't that sound good?
I'm like,
It is
man,
good.
it's
man.
cold
Oh,
and
it's so
rainy.
good.
And I'm like picturing this big steaming bowl of bison chili. I'm super excited. Like, I'm really excited. I don't get much food on the road that excites me. But a bison chili, man, okay, that's right up my alley. So I'm like, I'm not even gonna have a main meal. I'm gonna make that chili my main meal. Right? I'll have a little salad, and then I'll do the bison chili. So I order my bison chili, and then Rick is there. He orders a cup of the bison chili and a steak, and we've got a legislator friend in the back with us that orders a cup of the bison chili and a steak, and Deanna's with us, and she orders a steak, and so the food people get their samples or their small cups of bison chili.
Which was outstanding, delicious.
And they're
Best
both, man,
bison chili
greatest chili.
ever in the history of mankind. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
This is helping set this up. Go
And so
ahead.
they're like, great, and I'm just like, man, I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm eating my little salad, my rabbit food, waiting for my bison chili. Everybody gets their bison chili, eat, they tell me how great it is, and the waitress walks out, she goes, sir, I'm so sorry. Those two guys had the last 2 cups of bison chili.
And I am fat and happy right now. I just want to tell you, it was so good. Mark, hey Mark, you ought to try the bison chili. It is so good, man.
I mean, it's like, he's eating, and he's like, I thought about offering you a spoonful, but it was so good, I couldn't give it to you. Like the rest of the dinner, everybody just harassed me. I order a steak. Everybody finishes their entire meal. I'm like, there's no food. I'm watching these guys that are fully sated on their bison chili, their filet mignons or whatever. I don't know, you had some weird baseball cut. I don't even know what that was. Anyway, so it seems like we're good friends. Not that good of friends. He didn't save me any bison chili. And I got
I'm
right
going to talk about it for the rest of this trip. Right now.
All right, so, Rick and I do this all over the country, and we study the framers and the founders and the people who fought the American Revolution. And when we do this, I mean, I'm always inspired. I don't know, I read a lot of history, like a lot of biographies. I love to read about the battles and the men and the women and the families that gave so much. When we do that, when we look at history and read about history, we tend to read, like if you go to the Revolution, you're thinking about Patrick Henry and Madison and Adams and Franklin and like these giant figures, Washington on a white horse. I mean, these are incredible, monumental figures in history. So much so, they're almost not real to us anymore, like demigods, right? And then I look at those guys and I think, I'm nothing like them. Like, I'm not a general, I'm not commanding an army, I'm not going into war, I don't consider myself any kind of hero. And if we only study those people in history, I think it can make us feel too small. Because the reality is, those people did make history, but there were thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of other people that participated in the making of that history. If it were not for the patriots, the Minutemen, the guys that actually picked up muskets and their families that supported them, whose stories we don't know, people who died or were buried in anonymous graves who we don't know, if it were not for them, there'd be no revolution, there'd be no America, and we don't know hardly any of those stories. So a few years back, somebody introduced me to the story of a guy by the name of Captain Levi Preston. You will not find his story in any American history book. If you look it up online, you can find it now. It's been spread around out there, but it was written by a guy by the name of Mellon Chamberlain. Mellon Chamberlain was a historian, and in 1843, he was a young man, a teacher, self-taught historian. He was going around the country, and he was collecting the stories of the last remaining Minutemen. In 1843, these guys would have been between 80 and 90 years old. Now, by the way, in our day and age, we got guys that are still active on the ranch between 80 and 90 years old. Back then, you'd have been Methuselah old in your community if you're 80 to 90. Like, everybody in town would have known you. If you'd said, who's the oldest guy, they'd be like, oh, Levi Preston, you can go out to his place down on the river. He knows everything. He's been around forever. And so Chamberlain's going around the country, he's collecting these stories because he knows if he doesn't, they're going to be gone. There's no recording devices or anything. Like a guy like Levi Preston, he's not leaving a memoir of his time in the war. And so he finds Preston and he asks him a series of questions about the cause of the American Revolution. That's what he was trying to figure out. He says in the telling of this story that he thought he understood the American Revolution back then, and he knows less now than he knew back then. Like, he's realized over time, he's gotten wiser and wiser and understood how little he knows. He tells the story, by the way, in 1893 in the North Church in Danvers, where the Sons of American Revolution meet every year on the anniversary of the shot heard around the world. So he's invited to tell this story, to give a speech in that church. He tells the story, and one of the things I love about the story, funny little aside, we always say the media is fake media, and we harass the media, and we think they're terrible. They were harassing the media back then. He starts because the only media back then was the evening paper. Right, and in a small town, which most towns were, by the time the evening paper came out, everybody already knew the news. They got it at the barber shop or the library or the general store or from their family, their farm hands. Everybody knew the news. So the evening press was always late to the news on everything. So when Chamberlain's telling the story, he opens up by saying, I collected this story over 50 years ago. I trust it will be in time for the evening news. Right? So he's mocking the media. And he tells this story of meeting Captain Levi Preston. Now, Preston actually fought at Lexington. So he's there when the shot's fired that's heard around the world. And he's a farmer. He's just a regular guy. And what Mellon Chamberlain wants to know is, why did he fight? Like, what was the actual cause? Somebody who actually went there, not the people who wrote the speeches or the historians who told us about it, but a guy who was on the battlefield. I mean, you think about it, at the time, Preston was a farmer, a husband, a father. Like, he's not a soldier. I want you to put this in context, right? They were going out to fight the greatest military machine ever assembled in human history. The best fed, the best trained, the best armed, the most motivated in human history. And these guys were farmers. And it's like me saying to y'all, look, I know you're all pretty good with guns. I trust that. But it's like me saying there's a brigade of Marines coming into town. We're going to go face off on town square, right? It's like, that's crazy. So why would they do that? So he asks them a series of questions so that he can understand. And he says, Captain Preston, when you went out to face them redcoats that day, what did you mean by it? Preston says, what did I mean? What do you mean, what did I mean? He said, well, when you went out to fight them, why did you do it? And he said, was it because of the Stamp Act? You were frustrated having to buy those stamps and put them on all your documents? The stuff that we learned in school about why they fought the American Revolution. Preston says, Governor Bernard locked the stamps in the armory. I'm sure we never bought any of them. Not the stamps. He says, well, how about the tax on tea? That's just ridiculous tax on British tea. Maybe you were frustrated with that. He said, son, I was a farmer. We never drank any tea. So no tea tax, no Stamp Act. He said, well, maybe you were reading the great revolutionary writers, the things that inspired the founding fathers. Maybe you're reading Burke and maybe Paine, Common Sense. And he said, I never heard of those men. We read the Bible, Psalms. Some of us read the Almanac, but those men you speak of, I don't know those names. So it's not the writers, it's not the Stamp Act, it's not the tea tax. So I picture Chamberlain's frustrated. He thinks he knows the cause of the American Revolution. Here he's talking to a Minuteman who's telling us none of that stuff. So he says, maybe it was just the heavy hand of British tyranny. You were just sick and tired of living under British tyranny. He said, tyranny? I never felt any tyranny. No tyranny, no tea tax, no Stamp Act, no revolutionary writers. Well, why did you do it? What did you mean? And he said, son, when we went out to face them redcoats that day, well, we had always governed ourselves. And them redcoats, they intended that we shouldn't. And Chamberlain goes on to say that's the most succinct statement of the political philosophy of the American Revolution, anything ever said or written by anybody, any of the framers, any of the founders. This regular guy who was willing to put his life on the line, willing to put everything on the line. The whole reason was he wasn't willing to let people tell him what to do. For 158 years before him, his father, his grandfather, 5 generations had governed themselves without interference from the crown. And now you have the king and parliament saying, now we're going to tell you what to do. We're coming here, we're going to tell you, you're going to live under our boot now. And he just said, no, I'm not.
And it reminds me of my kids when they're little, and my son would tell his little sister what to do, and she'd say, "You're not the boss of me," right? And that's how they felt. And by the way, you're the inheritors of that political philosophy. It's in your political DNA, and every day it grinds on you, and I know it does. And you think government's telling me how to use my land, government's telling me how much water I can use, government's telling me how to drive my car, what colored paint I can paint things. They're telling you how much water your toilet can flush. And I know it grinds on you because it grinds on me, because you have inherited those values that Levi Preston had in him that allowed him to walk out on Lexington Green that day and bravely take on those redcoats. And the only question that we have to ask ourselves today is, do we have the fortitude of Levi Preston? And I can tell you here, especially, because I travel all over the country, y'all haven't lost that. This is Wyoming. This is still the frontier. This is still the Wild West. This is still a place where people say, "Oh no, hell no, you're not going to tell me what to do." A lot of people came to Wyoming because they didn't want to be told what to do. Montana, South Dakota, states like this, because they wanted to live free. And the question is, do we have the fortitude to stand up against the federal government and tell them, "No, hell no, you can't tell us what to do"? I believe that we do, and I'm going to fight for that for the rest of my life, and I hope you guys will stand and fight with me. That I'm going to